Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Abbott. I'm here with Kieran. We're both program managers with the SharePoint team. We're here to talk to you about what you can do for preparing for SharePoint on mobile, what you can do within your environments, thinking about some of the scenarios, some of the devices, and the experiences that you're going to deliver there. You've probably seen through some of the sessions so far this week, three big trends impacting the way that we work, and these really come right home to this session and to some of the things we're going to be thinking about today. So first, the expectation of up to 1 billion smartphones by 2016. I would go so far as to say if you don't have a phone on you or in your pocket, you're probably in the wrong session or the wrong city maybe, but we're going to be talking about how those mobile devices are used at work and what you can do for SharePoint enabling those devices. Social has also been a really key part, a key theme. We heard at the keynote with Yammer and the investments the SharePoint team have made about bringing social. We're going to show some of those social experiences on mobile as well. But I think sort of the bigger point there is just the expectation that some of those tools have set for the user as far as their ability to connect with other people for work or people outside of work, as well as that degree of connectivity. They want anywhere access, and we need to deliver that on their mobile devices. The third big trend, of course, is the cloud. Up to 50% of the enterprise customers are on the road to the cloud, and I think that implies that approximately 50% aren't. Obviously, at Microsoft, we're embracing both of those visions, whether you're going to the cloud or staying with on-prem deployments. And we're going to talk through both of those experiences today. So the vision that we have at Microsoft around that centers on two key tenets that we're going to spend time talking about. First, the best experience across mobile devices. So how many of you out here have gone and gotten your new Windows Phone 8? We realize that not everyone has the luck of having this lovely Lumia, right? We're really embracing any device you're bringing to work, right? So whether you're using a Lumia or HTC, whether you're coming in with Android or iOS, we're going to be talking through those different scenarios and the experiences there. Bringing that experience across device also means that your Office 2013 client that works with your Office works with your mobile device, so you have Office 2013 mobile experiences. You work on your PowerPoint deck on your PC and walk away. You can pick up right where you left off on your mobile device. The other piece of this productivity vision, of course, is cloud on your terms. And I touched on that last slide, just the idea that whether you're deploying on-prem with your own infrastructure or you're looking to leverage Office 365 and take SharePoint into the cloud, or a mix of both, what we call a hybrid environment, we expect our different customers are going to embrace those different models, and we're going to talk about mobile in those different contexts. So specific for the content that we're going to be talking about here, there are really three key pillars that we're going to spend time on. The first is mobile ready. So what have we done as far as the browser, the app, and the browser and app experiences, and what's the role of Exchange as well in bringing together a really great mobile environment. We're going to talk about the infrastructure and just spend a little bit of time looking at mobile access to an on-prem environment and talk about the authentication scenarios there, as well as some more details around the authentication experience for Office 365. I think my expectation is you probably know more about authentication protocols on-prem. You might have more questions about things like IDCRL and active authentication and what we're doing on Office 365. So we'll spend a little more time focusing on that. And then we'll close with a little discussion about some of the fine-tuning, the work that happens within the IT departments and with your consulting teams to fine-tune the environment for your organization. You might have caught an earlier session on the device channels and what you can do for building custom application experiences. Sandeep Srivastava and some of his colleagues will present after us on building your own apps, but we'll touch on that in sort of the tail end of our session. Okay. So the first piece, mobile ready. There are three key experiences that we deliver from SharePoint as far as the lowest common denominator for accessing that SharePoint experience. And that's across the browser. Three key ways we serve up that content. If you're familiar with SharePoint 2010, they had what we call the classic view, or there's a mobile view there. The one that you see is very text-centric on the far on my far left. What side is that on? Anyway, the classic view. That's a very text-centric approach. It is really optimized for the older phone form factors, for a smartphone or a feature phone. Sorry, for a feature phone. This middle picture, what we call the contemporary view, this is the new smartphone optimized view. This is served up with HTML5. It's really a great new modern touch experience served up on a very small screen. The key thing for those contemporary views is the engineering teams have spent a lot of time working with their customers, talking about the key scenarios, and highlighting just those few features in that contemporary view. So I'll show an example going into a team site. We really hone in on the dock experience or hone in on the task experience and try to remove a lot of the other features out of the way of the user. And third, of course, is full screen UI. And many people with a large enough screen on their mobile device with some amount of pinching and zooming, they're going to appreciate having the full browser page served up to them with all of the capability, just served on a smaller form factor. To enable those mobile views, there's a feature called the automatic mobile redirect. And essentially what this does is it's enabled by default on most of your team sites. But if you're setting up a custom site, you might want to make sure that you've enabled this setting. Basically, this enables the mobile devices that's coming in to get served up a mobile optimized page. The automatic mobile redirect feature works in conjunction with this next piece, with a compat.browser. So the compat.browser file, it's a text file you can update, which basically has the information about the user agent string coming in from the different mobile devices, and then the experience that should be delivered for that device. So if you bring up your iOS and connect, the user agent string that's sent along with that will indicate the version of the Safari browser on there, and you'll get the appropriate page returned. If someone's still walking around with their iPhone 3 or maybe with some older feature phone, then they're going to get served up a different experience thanks to that compat.browser file. You can modify that file so you have the experience. You can tune that in your environment if you had a specific SharePoint experience that you were building for your user base. Then you might want to modify this compat.browser file to really optimize it for your scenario. So I want to just take a moment to show that contemporary browser view and guarantee that you probably have a whole bunch of cool phones out there in the audience, but I bet no one has this phone like this. This is what we call the dog phone. So if you can imagine how you beta software, this is the beta hardware for the Windows Phone. Although it's a little bit of a brick, it's still pretty fun to carry around and use. Let me switch over. Oh, you got me switched. Thank you. So here I am on the home screen of my Windows 8 phone. You can see all the tiles. I'm going to zoom in on a tile I saved here earlier, which is for a team site. And so this is the default team site for my user. I'm signing in as Ann Wallace. So the default team site, if you bring that up in the browser, of course, you'd expect to see the left-hand nav, the top nav, some of the content. But going to that default team site in the browser, we're recognizing the form factor coming in based on that user agent string and serving up a very optimized view. So there are a few things I can do. I could go into the document folders, but I just want to highlight briefly the simplified navigation. That top bar takes me to display some of the different menu components of that team site. I want to jump into tasks. The work management team has done a bunch of work to build a custom task page for mobile. So when you come into the task that task list, they've optimized that page and optimized for touch so that when I look at that, I say, oh, I've prepared for the conference and traveled out there, traveled out to Vegas. I'm actually attending that conference. Oh, come on.
Fat fingers.
Fat, exactly. I want to touch that one. Dog phone, right? No. So I was able to at least prepare for the conference. That part was marked complete. The other piece I want to show is from that task page, I can expand if I'm trying to get access to other pieces of that SharePoint site. I might want to switch out to the PC view. And this will actually pull down that full page into the browser, and I'll be able to pinch and zoom my way around if I was trying to get access to other parts of that page. So you can see it in small font up there. It's even smaller here, but I'm able to zoom in, of course. And this is just your SharePoint page, that full team site served up in that small browser. Thanks, Karen. Okay, the second piece I want to talk about is around the application experiences. So we've built out a few really targeted scenarios or applications for targeted scenarios and delivered those on the mobile platform as well. The first one is around the Office Hub. So if you are a Windows Phone user, the Office Hub has all of the Office clients as well as the connection to SharePoint and to your SkyDrive Pro document library. The documents, as I mentioned earlier, those documents roam with you from the work you do on your PC through the cloud, whether that's through SharePoint or through SkyDrive, roam with you so you can pick up where you left off on that mobile device. We're also building out applications for the targeted social scenarios, and we're going to show both the newsfeed on the Windows 8 app as well as on iPad, so you get a sense of the application experiences that we're building there. I'm going to go through a demo of that Office Hub a little bit later, but before I get into that part, I did want to take a moment to talk about the web applications. So the Office Hub on Windows 8 is pretty awesome for serving up all the clients, right, the Office clients right there on the phone. We know that people are bringing in their iPad into work as well, and they're really craving that rich experience for working with Office documents from there. I want to demonstrate the web application. You've seen it probably earlier versions of the web apps as well for SharePoint 2010. But on SharePoint 2013, we've done a lot of work to optimize that mobile experience for those web applications. So bringing up an iPad with that browser experience. There are two key pieces I'd like to point out there. First is the mobile, the WAC experience, the web applications, are available as part of the SharePoint Online experience, part of that Office 365. They've actually split out that web application infrastructure from the SharePoint infrastructure. So it's possible from the engineering perspective for us to keep updating that service and keep updating the capability for those web applications in a very rapid manner. For the on-prem deployments, similarly, splitting out that web application as a separate server enables you to provide the kind of the scalability and the performance that's required for this web application to deliver those web applications to your users. Let's see. So I want to just take a moment and show this over here. Yeah, thanks, iPad. Awesome. So here's our iPad tethered up here. In case you can't tell from the screen, that's an iPad. That's a team site that we're looking at in the browser, in Safari. And we're just, again, back to that same default team site where I've served up the page in Safari, and I want to look at some of the content in here. I'm going to look at an Excel spreadsheet that I have as an example, Northwind customer data. So it's going to bring up the Excel web app. And first, we'll just be in the view mode for the web application experience. I have the data here, whether I'm looking at the list of name and content information for Northwind traders, or earlier I built a pivot table, put that information in here, and I can both zoom around or move the content around. I can use the pivots, the slicers within that web application if I want to zoom in to see what's happening, particular to Florida. I can easily interact with that web application. I can also go into edit mode right here in the browser. And then you get the familiar ribbon up top, so there's a familiar way to interact with that experience. It's not quite the same full feature set as you get with Excel. I would not want to be the guy entering in all that data on the iPad, carefully touching, but to serve up that information in a way that you can easily review the information, present it, pivot, work through share the data, share the displays. All that is a great use of that web application. Okay. Excuse me. One more piece that I want to talk about as far as the mobile readiness, sort of the infrastructure perspective, was around the role for Exchange 2013. So I know it's the SharePoint conference, but definitely want to give our hats off to Exchange for the work that they've done as well. There are a few key pieces when it comes to mobile, at least two key pieces I want to talk about. First is the managing device component. We certainly expect that most people, when they're using their mobile phone for work, the primary application they're loading up on there is mail. And by adding in that mail account, they're actually using EAS to contact that Exchange server and getting the policies applied down to their device. Whether that's a PIN lock policy and the complexity of that PIN, et cetera. So there are pages that are available up there if you're looking at a 365 screenshot on the left. This is the information for managing your device. And it's possible to go in using the EAS rules and configure the specifics for your environment. The other important piece for Exchange is this role of auto-discovery. So I'll demonstrate it in a second on the Windows Phone 8 how this works or what it looks like. But essentially, when I add in my Exchange account onto my Windows Phone, I'm contacting that Exchange server and determining if there is a MySite host that's associated in that environment. And if there is a MySite host, and then it will take my credentials and look for my particular MySite, and within that MySite, find the SkyDrive Pro document library, and automatically put that document library in my Office Hub. So there are two things when you're going through setting up your Windows Phone. One of the first things you do is give it a live ID, and that gets access, or your Microsoft ID, and that'll get access to your consumer, your personal content from SkyDrive. And the second thing is when you add in your email account and add Exchange, it will contact the Exchange server, find out your MySite, and bring down your SkyDrive Pro document library, your work content. So I want to actually show that. I'm going to go back to the Wolf Vision. Thank you. We're in focus. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the home screen of my Windows Phone. Focusing? Is it focused? Everybody see clear? Okay. Keep my fingers out of the way. So in the settings, I'm just going to go ahead and add an email account. And I'll add a Outlook account. And I'm going to make it easier for me by typing in off here. Adding in NW at SB Social Apps 2 on Microsoft. One second here. Second to focus. Okay, so basically put in the credentials for Ann Wallace. I'm going to sign in. So it's checking, hopefully on that wireless network that is much more reliable now than it's ever been. It's checking for that Exchange server and looking for the settings for that email account. If it finds that email, those Exchange settings, it's going to find my MySite host. Nope, I didn't find it. I did type that correctly. Let me try that one more time. If not, I can show you the end result. Again, it's going to try and connect. No. Let me show you what it would look like if that was really a successful demo. It would end up with a result much like this. The Office Hub here, it would automatically add this one, my SkyDrive at Microsoft. This is Mark Cashman's phone that I'm borrowing. But it automatically add this SkyDrive document library, which is connected up to that MySite. You saw in some of the earlier demos. So it's connected up to that MySite document library. And so all that content is now accessible to me. It's also brought me the recent documents. So the content that I opened up on my PC is roamed through that SharePoint service and available on my phone now, so I can pick up where I left off. Okay. Okay, just as a bit of a reference, because I know that people will access these decks later on, this is the full support matrix for the different browser versions and what that experience would be on their phone. I think the really key takeaway here is that we're supporting the major recent versions of the browsers, whether that's on iOS or Android or Windows Phone. Do note that there's a caveat on the Office web apps. And so the full support requires the latest iOS version. It still supports some of the more basic capabilities, even on the older versions. Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk just about the infrastructure behind this and how you get access to these experiences. So just maybe a show of hands, if I might. How many of you folks are deploy your SharePoint infrastructure on premise? You haven't yet moved to the cloud. Okay, a couple. Yeah. Okay. How many of you guys actually have access to your SharePoint content right now from work? Right. So much smaller percentage, right? There's certainly some work to do in order to enable that mobile access. Now, some people will do something like a Citrix environment where you can just remote in. That's one common approach. We want to talk just about, in a typical environment, two main approaches that we might look at. The first might be this perimeter in proxy approach. The point here is, for those users, when you're on the corporate network, if you've actually taken your device and joined the corporate Wi-Fi, and you've enabled your user to do that in order to authenticate onto that Wi-Fi, and authenticate through a proxy, then they might have access directly to that SharePoint server. So the application experiences that we provide, both for the Office Hub on Windows Phone, as well as some of the applications that we're building, will support NTLM for direct access when you're on the corporate network. Coming in from outside the network through a proxy, from the browser, that typically requires some sort of forms-based authentication. We think a more typical environment might be more like this, where you've secured that SharePoint environment in between two firewalls. You're using a proxy for all your mobile users. You're not expecting them to access directly on the corporate network. They're using their 3G or LTE plans in order to access that data. In these cases, there are basically two core authentication protocols or authentication schemes that we support. The first is using forms-based authentication, and that is supported across all the mobile browsers. So if you're coming in for your Android or iOS or Windows Phone or RIM, any of these devices, you'll be able to use a browser and access that SharePoint infrastructure. The example that we often use is the Unified Access Gateway, which is the SharePoint product, or the Threat Management Gateway. You might have your other proxy that you've put in place there. The key thing there is that it's the proxy that's controlling that authentication experience that serves up the information to the user and kind of controls the UI around that authentication experience for the browser. Our applications that we've built also support basic authentication. So if you enable basic authentication on that proxy, then you can use basic auth to access the SharePoint servers. In those cases, we are requiring that it's an SSL connection. We'll only connect to a fully qualified domain name server. So we're adding some layers of security on top of that relatively simple security protocol. We realize that there's a lot of other work that you'd like to see around built-in VPNs into your clients, around other secure access methods. Really, for the moment, what you're looking at is either the forms-based auth for the browsers, or using something simpler like that basic authentication scheme. Okay? The experience that's then served up to the user, as I mentioned, is on the left, the FBA. The UI is controlled by the proxy. This is the support for all the major mobile browsers. So in this case, it's the Threat Management Gateway that's serving up the UI. The user simply adds in their username, their password, the credentials that are required, and whether form that's required depending on how you've configured that environment, before they're given access to that SharePoint infrastructure. Right. For the applications, though, that we build, then it's the applications build in that UI. So for basic authentication, we will serve up those fields inside of the app. On the right, we're looking at the sign-in screen from that Office Hub where we might present that basic authentication login. It's the right-hand side is the app-specific implementation. That's where the app developer controls that login experience, much more than on the proxy side. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to hand it over to Kieran so we can talk more about deploying in the cloud and what that authentication experience is like for our applications. And then we'll have a chance to talk more and to show some more of the applications in a moment.
Great. Thanks, Abbott. Welcome, everyone. So I was going to start this session by asking how many people are already deployed in the cloud, but I think instead I'll ask how many people are thinking about deploying to the cloud. Could I get a show of hands? Interested, looking at Office 365, SharePoint Online? So it's a fair number of you. Great, thanks. So here at Microsoft, we're really, really excited about the cloud. We're excited for a bunch of reasons, but the one I want to talk about today is because of the awesome authentication options it provides for mobile device access to your SharePoint resources. So we're talking about SharePoint Online, of course. When you're looking at SharePoint Online, the identity provider is streamlined. Your identity is now provided by what's called the Microsoft Online Services ID. That typically means your users will log in with something like you see up here, and.wallace@contoso.com. You'll notice if some of you have spun up some of your test tenancies on Office 365, SharePoint Online 2013, that your usernames will have onmicrosoft.com in it. Ours do for these demo purposes, but you can, of course, use your vanity domain for your own organization, such as contoso.com. As I mentioned, we're super excited about the cloud because it means that we can provide a simplified authentication experience, in this case, claims-based authentication. And you, as the end users, as the IT admins, as the organizations, can choose how you're going to authenticate to SharePoint Online. And we provide two main methods, passive and active authentication. And we'll go ahead and cover both in this session. Passive authentication is what you're looking at right now, as well as what was on the previous slide. It looks very much like a web form. It's served up by Office 365, the Microsoft Online Services identity provider. And it works across all platforms, desktop, modern, mobile. And it's a very consistent UI. So this is the Android login experience. It looks similar to the desktop screenshot I just showed you on the previous screen. You log in with the same set of credentials that you saw on the previous screen. The second type of authentication method for SharePoint Online is called active authentication. And there are a couple ways active authentication solves some of the pain points for passive, and we'll be taking a look at how it solves some of those pain points and what the actual process is. The important thing to note is that passive authentication works across all platforms, all browsers, and all clients. Rich clients can use it. Whereas active authentication can primarily be used by rich clients. It's not supported in mobile browsers. I've referenced a really awesome session that you could check out if you're interested to do a deep dive on these different authentication methods for the cloud. This is a similar diagram like Abbott showed you, except now we're looking at SharePoint in the cloud. That's why we have the little SharePoint server in the cloud symbol. What I'd like to call out here is the dotted lines and the solid lines between the devices and the SharePoint. The dotted lines are the devices that can authenticate through passive authentication, or FBA, forms-based auth. The solid lines are devices or platforms or apps that can use the new active authentication, which we'll cover. We're going to start out with a quick demo of mobile browsers and how they can authenticate to SharePoint Online using that FBA, forms-based authentication. So we'll be projecting here. This is iPhone, no smoke and mirrors, my iPhone here. Going to be going over 3G. Hopefully it might be a little bit faster than our Wi-Fi. So what I'm going to show here is connecting to my SkyDrive Pro. Of course, if you're on an awesome Windows phone like this Nokia Lumia 980, you'd be using the Office Hub. If you're on an iPhone, what you can use is our great mobile-optimized views of SkyDrive Pro. I'm going to select a bookmark for Ann Wallace, our test user. You can see it's connecting to our test demo tenant. And it's noticed I'm not authenticated, so it's actually redirected to login.microsoftonline.com. Maybe a little bit hard to see, but hopefully you can see the URL changing. I'll go ahead and enter Ann's username, pick up the device, so I can quickly enter her password here. And you'll notice what will happen after I do this is that's the end of my login experience. Microsoft Online is now authenticating Ann Wallace. It's done. It's redirecting to my final location, which was Ann Wallace's SkyDrive Pro. Taking a few seconds, but it'll eventually get there. And what you'll see is the awesome mobile-optimized view of a document library that we've built in SharePoint 2013. This is Ann Wallace's SkyDrive Pro. So that was the complete end-to-end experience coming in from my mobile device, completely unauthenticated, using Safari Mobile on an iPhone to access some of my resources on SharePoint Online. We're really excited about how awesome we can make that experience for our mobile devices. This is what we call the protocol dance. It's a little bit dense, but if you take a look at it, it's essentially exactly what we just saw in the 30-second demo that I showed you. It started out with the user, Ann Wallace, trying to access SharePoint by, in this case, going to my SkyDrive Pro. Of course, Microsoft Online detected I was unauthenticated. It said, hey, please go ahead and log in. I'm going to send you back a URL to the login page that you should go to. That was that web form that we saw, the Office 365 sign-in page. The user interacted with that web form, and you'll notice the little circle arc that I have there. This indicates that through this forms-based authentication protocol, that step is actually undefined. It's a black box to the client how long the user has to interact. In my case, I only interacted with one form, but it could be a few more forms, and we'll take a look at that later on of an example where I, the user, have to interact with a couple forms. But the point is that the client, in this case the Safari mobile browser, doesn't really know when the end of that process will be reached. It just knows what the final URL is that it's looking for. In this case, I quickly reached the final URL. I posted that information back to SharePoint Online. It confirmed my identity by looking me back up in the Windows Azure Active Directory for Office 365. Ann Wallace was a valid user, so it sent back an authentication cookie to my client, Safari Mobile, on my iPhone. The client then took that cookie, attached it to the request, and said, let me make that initial request again for Ann Wallace's SkyDrive Pro. And of course, it worked, because my authentication cookie was valid, and I was able to grab that awesome mobile-optimized view of my SkyDrive Pro. So this is the protocol dance for passive authentication, forms-based auth. The last session in this infrastructure section will be around federated. So again, I'm going to ask for a quick raise of hands. How many people are looking at a federated environment in which you have on-premises resources and online resources, and you want users to be able to access both? Interesting point for a crowd? It's about a similar number. So we'll show what that experience looks like for mobile devices as well. The first thing we want to call out is that we highly, highly recommend that you enable single sign-on if you're federating your environment. There are 3 high-level steps to actually doing that. But the main reason why you actually want to do it is because it makes it easier for your lives and for your users' lives. As administrators of the environment, you don't have to manage multiple IDs for different users, and your users only have to remember one password and username to access both on-premises and online resources. So it's a really simple environment and experience from your mobile device, where typing and remembering and entering long passwords can be a little bit tricky on a small form factor. So in order to get this working, you need to take one of your servers, your on-premises servers, and have it act as a dedicated STS, or security token service. The STS is responsible for looking up users and issuing security tokens on behalf of those users back to SharePoint Online to say, yes, this is an authenticated user in our on-premises Active Directory environment. The second thing you need to do is to go ahead and create a federated trust between the on-premises STS and the cloud Windows Azure for SharePoint Online. And the third thing you should do is go ahead and kick off that Active Directory sync from on-premises to online. And I've referenced another section which gives a great how-to. You can go back and look at the deck for that session of actually going through the PowerShell scripts to make this work. Once you've set that up, your resulting environment is called a token-based authentication environment, and it adheres to all of the SAML 1.1 and WSF 1.1 protocols that you've come to expect from industry standard authentication. So it should be something that you're very familiar with from other authentication examples or experiences. So here's that same diagram that I've showed you. But in this case, notice there's an addition to it, the on-premises STS. After you've hooked up that on-premises STS, when the user logs in, the STS will actually provide the authentication token, not Microsoft Online Services like you saw in the first demo. So to show that contrast, we're actually going to redo that first demo, but in a federated environment, so that you can see what that looks like. Last time I did it on an iPhone. This time I'll be doing it on that same iPad that Abbott did the web apps demo from. This is Safari. I've bookmarked my own personal SkyDrive Pro. Sorry about that. I work at Microsoft. Microsoft embraces the cloud, but we also require some of our resources to be on-premise. So we've set up a federated environment. I'm going to go ahead and enter my username at Microsoft.com. And I'm about to enter my password. But you'll notice that this yellow bar pops up. It says, you are now required to sign in at Microsoft.com. That's because it knows that the Microsoft.com tenancy is federated to an on-premises STS. So I'll go ahead and hit sign in at Microsoft.com. Look at the URL. It's redirected to corp.sts.microsoft.com, our on-premises STS provider. I'm going to enter my password and, of course, switch the input back while I coolly go ahead and log in. Great. Hopefully I did that right. Wait for that to come back. I've entered my password here. Dismiss the keyboard. Notice, by the way, this is quite a nice mobile optimized view. Maybe a little bit too much. It's quite large, but it's easy for me to tap on the different zones, which is nice. And it's authenticated me, and now I've reached the location I was trying to reach, which was my SkyDrive Pro. In this case, I hit 2 web forms, if you recall, the initial one plus our on-premises STS web form where I entered my Active Directory credentials, and I was able to hit my SkyDrive Pro. Notice also that we are not rendering the mobile view of my SkyDrive because I'm on an iPad, and through that really intelligent mobile redirection, it knows I'm on a tablet, which can render the full view, and I don't even have to pinch and zoom because it fits perfectly on my tablet device. And the same would work if you're on a Surface or any other supported tablet device. So it's a really neat experience, both in pure SharePoint Online as well as in the federated case. So I talked about those 2 types of authentication, passive and active. You just saw 2 examples of the passive authentication. Now we'll show you a couple examples of the active authentication. But before doing that, I want to tell you a little bit about why active authentication is so awesome. It's awesome for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that you don't have to show the user the web form to log in. You can host that form in native code in your own app. So what you're looking at is a screenshot of our SharePoint newsfeed app for iPad. And this is our login experience, and it doesn't look anything like the Office 365 sign-in experience because we built a SharePoint-branded, optimized native login experience. That's one of the advantages of ActiveAuth. The second advantage of using active authentication is that the user simply provides their credentials up front, username, password, and server if necessary, and then they're done. The protocol automatically re-authenticates them in the background. This is different from forms-based auth. For forms-based auth, I got issued that cookie, but the cookie doesn't last forever. It will expire over time, and when it does, the user has to re-interact with that web form. The advantage that we're looking at for ActiveAuth is that when the cookie expires, the client will actually re-authenticate for the user actively, and it won't require any sort of user interaction to do that. So it's a really great experience for your mobile users, especially, like I said, when it's hard to type on mobile devices on small form factors. As I mentioned before, ActiveAuth can only be used on rich clients. Mobile browsers will go ahead and authenticate using passive auth in the past 2 demos we saw. Currently, we have a number of clients that use active authentication, including the Office 2013 desktop and modern apps, as well as the iOS app, as well as the Windows 8 modern newsfeed app, both of which we'll be showing you a demo of this afternoon. This is the same diagram that I showed you last time. Notice again the on-premises STS because we're looking at a federated environment, but this time we're going to show you demos of that bottom section, the Windows 8 and the iPad apps authenticating through ActiveAuth to SharePoint Online again. So let's go ahead and go back to the iPad app. Plug that in. Standard iOS home screen. This is a screenshot of the newsfeed app that you saw. Turn it this way. It's a little bit easier to see. I'm logging in again as Ann Wallace to our test tenant. I pre-entered my password and username, my server, and I'm going to go ahead and hit sign in. And what you'll notice is I'm not going to be faced with a web form. I'm not going to be faced with any sort of next screen or continuing to go on. The client, in this case the app that we've built, has authenticated for me, and it's logged me right in. in a matter of seconds, I'm here accessing my newsfeed content as Ann Wallet, looking at these awesome pictures, showing off the cool newsfeed features that we have here. So that was an example of the authentication experience for active auth, and why, as you can clearly see, we think it's a superior experience and solves many of the pain points that you just had with the previous passive authentication. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that same demo on an awesome Microsoft Surface. Abbott will be covering that demo for us.
Okay. So let me just great. We have the Surface up. And I'm going to log in as Ann. So we're looking at the Surface app. There's the typical home screen for the Surface. We've installed this SharePoint app, which is the newsfeed application. And you'll notice when I bring up that app, we're going to get prompted for an authentication using that native Windows 8 UI. So we're built this into the application itself with a common look and feel to some of the other applications that you might build on Windows 8. I'm going to log in Ann here. Oh, I'm actually going to log in as myself because I'm having more luck getting me access. And when I log in, we're actually going through a similar auto discovery process. So I've just put in my email address and my credentials for my domain. And when I go ahead and access that, we're looking to see if those creds have been cached locally, if there's any information from other applications that share that same cache. And then we'll use IDCRL in order to authenticate to that SharePoint server. The application that we're looking at here looks a little messier than the one that Kieran was showing. This is in a much earlier stage of development, so it's still fairly tender. But we are just showing that it has that common authentication experience, and I can interact with those feeds similar to what Kieran had showed that news feed experience on iOS, including going in and liking or bringing up a reply, etc. So I'm able to use IDCRL on this native Windows 8 app with a similar sort of application experience as what we're delivering across the other native apps.
Great. Thanks, Abbott. So hopefully you can see why we're super excited about this new active authentication protocol and why we're encouraging developers as well as our internal apps to go ahead and take advantage of it. So let's deep dive a little bit on what we just saw in both of those demos about IDCRL. So active authentication goes by a couple of names, in fact, and you might see this throughout our TechNet documentation. SharePoint Online, or SBO ActiveAuth, is one name for it. IDCRL is another. That stands for the Microsoft Office Identity Client Runtime Library. A little bit of a mouthful. FBA Enhanced is yet another term that generally all refer to active authentication, or what you just saw in both of our apps, essentially showing a native UI for logging in and for automatically re-authenticating the user after they've logged in that first time. So what happens in both of those apps is slightly different than when you're logging in through passive authentication. The key difference is what I've highlighted here in purple, the purple box, is that you ask the user up front for their information, their username, their password, and their server in the case of no auto-discovery. And then after you have that information, the client does everything else. No more interaction needed from the user. The client passes off and contacts the server and says, hey, we're trying to authenticate for this user. The server says, great. Why don't you tell me who you are? I accept IDCRL, so let's talk IDCRL. The client says, great, I can talk IDCRL. I've got user information, username, password. I'll pass it back to you. The server gets that. It looks the user up, again, either in Windows Azure for SharePoint Online only, or in the on-premises STS for Active Directory federated situations. Authenticates the user, sends back in a token. The client caches that token and says, great, I'll use this token to re-authenticate the user in the future whenever the cookie expires. It's called a refresh token. After it gets that, and then passes the token back and says, great, I have a valid token for a user. Please give me the data I was asking for. The server says, all right, we'll pass you back an authentication cookie. Again, the same as for FBA. It passes back the cookie. It's an active cookie this time. And then finally, the client says, great, I have the cookie. Give me the data. Here's the auth cookie to go with it. Can I have the data now? The server says, yep, you look good to me. You have access to this information. passes back the data to the user. This is a little bit more complicated than the FBA protocol, and that's by design because the protocol is actively authenticating for the user, and the user doesn't have to do anything up front. They just have to do what I pointed out in the first box, which is enter their information up front. And as a result, it'll do the rest of the authentication for the user. So we've covered mobile ready. We've covered SharePoint on-premises, SharePoint online, and the authentication experiences. Lastly, we're going to cover a few extra things that we're recommending you do for your users to make the mobile experience even more awesome while they're accessing SharePoint or SharePoint Online. There are 3 things we're recommending you do. The first one is take advantage of this really, really neat feature we have called mobile device channels. You may have caught Alyssa Levitz's session on device channels. We're covering that a little bit here. The second thing we're recommending you do is to deploy these mobile apps that we've showed you so your users can leverage the power of social on mobile throughout your company. And the third thing we're doing is providing you tools to build your own apps for the scenarios that meet your specific needs. So let's take a look at device channels. Device channels is a really powerful feature that we've built that allows you to render a page in multiple different views based on what device you're coming in as using user agent string detection. You can author the content once, set up mobile device channels, and automatically get renditioned for your pages at the end user device. You can do this using the Design Manager, which is a new feature in SharePoint 2013. You set up the CSS style sheets, you set up the master pages, you do that all once, and then you publish your content, and afterwards, the device channels just kick in whenever users access that site from a particular device. You've probably already started to compare those 2 images up there. I'll just draw your attention to a couple components of the side-by-side. One side is the desktop view of the site. The second side is the mobile view on a Windows Phone mobile device. A few key differences I want to point out. That whole sidebar on the right side of the desktop view, which contains some nice-to-know information, but it's not critical to the site, is not present on the mobile rendering because it just won't fit. The entire navigation bar at the top, including the blue bar, the white bar, the gray bar, the features, the branding there have been consolidated into a single narrow gray bar on the mobile rendering, which contains just the core information, or what this author thought was the core information. In this case, the name, the company branding name, the menu, which is the 3 lines, and the ability to search. So they've created a mobile-specific view with the things they think are important that automatically get served up to the user when they hit this page. It's a really powerful feature, and it allows you to create pages for only the devices you care about: Android, iOS, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, iPad, iPhone. Whatever devices you use in your organization, you can create some really great views based on the popularity of those devices. I've referenced the session that I was mentioning for a great how-to to go step-by-step of building those device channels. The last thing we mentioned was around mobile apps, modern apps, and desktop apps, all of which can be built that interact with SharePoint. We showed you some of the awesome mobile apps that we've built and the Windows 8 Modern app. They will be available in early 2013 from the respective marketplaces: the Windows Store for Windows 8, Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, and the Apple App Store for iPhone and iPad, with Android coming down in the future. We're encouraging you to provide these apps to your users so they can take advantage of the awesome experiences that we've built. But if you're interested in extending that, you totally can, and we provided the tools to do that. Whenever you're looking at building third-party apps to interact with a platform, the 2 big problems that need to be solved are authentication and what you can do after you've authenticated. And we provided solutions to solve both of those. We provided a host of tools for authenticating to SharePoint. You've seen how we've interacted through mobile devices, authenticating to SharePoint Online. And we've also provided a host of APIs. And I've referenced a couple awesome sessions that show you how to use those APIs, including extending social, as well as Amit mentioned, a session that comes right after this one for building apps for Windows Phone that can interact with SharePoint. And there are a few more sessions that you can look up, or you may have already attended, that explain the API set that we've delivered. And you can use these to build desktop apps, modern apps, and mobile apps that meet your needs when interacting with SharePoint. So to conclude, we've covered 3 big sections that we think are super important when taking a look at preparing your environment for SharePoint mobile access. We talked about how SharePoint and Office as a whole are mobile ready out of the box. We talked about SharePoint Online, SharePoint on-premises, the extra things you need to do to hook up mobile devices, or in the case of online, what those experiences look like when connecting from mobile devices. And lastly, we talked about a few simple things that you can do to make the experience even more awesome for your users when coming in from a mobile device and rendering. So at this point, we'd like to go ahead and put up that full list of sessions that we mentioned in case you want to jot down a few. And we'll go ahead and take questions. It looks like there are at least 2 mics here and here. Feel free to line up. And we're looking forward to any questions you have around SharePoint and mobile. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Nicely done.
Cool. Take the first question over here.
So you mentioned about the active authentication. Does on-prem, does that fall back if the device doesn't support it?
So the question is, if a device does not support on-prem, will it fall back to a different type of method? The answer is, by default, most likely not. Both of the devices have to be talking the same language, essentially. So in the protocol dance I showed you, the client says, hey, I support ActiveAuth. The server says, I support ActiveAuth. Let's do the protocol dance. If one says, I support ActiveAuth, and the other one doesn't, then it's up to the client to build in logic that'll fall back to the right form of authentication. Yeah.
And sorry, the other one is we always use for our clients have been using TMG and before that ISA. They've just announced end of life for that at the end of this year. Is there something built in for forms authentication in 2013?
Yep. So I'll actually let Abbott talk a little bit to that point around UAG and moving forward.
Yeah, so I missed could you repeat the question? It was.
So for our clients, we always use TMG.
Oh, you're using TMG. Got it. So for those of you that are using TMG, they have announced end of life for TMG and what that future support is. There is a lot more detail available than what I have, but the Unified Access Gateway is one approach. My understanding is there is sort of a future path to go from your TMG experience into that Unified Access Gateway. Right. I don't have the details on what that migration or what that experience is.
Cool. Question over here? Great.
I have a question regarding connecting Windows 8 on dedicated cloud. So we have a problem at the moment where in the 7.5 there was UAG, and that was great. Then came the Windows 8, which doesn't have UAG.
Windows Phone 8? Yeah. Sorry, Windows Phone 8 are you talking about? Okay.
So what do you recommend then the best way to authenticate, let's say, the Office app, for example?
So there was a feature within the Windows Phone 7.5 which had a UAG setting in there. Right? That provided a specific capability around short name to long name translation, but that forms authentication capability that was enabled in 7.5 is still available in Windows Phone 8. So even though there's no UAG setting, you're still able to use UAG as your proxy to access that SharePoint server.
So from your Office client on your Windows Phone 8,
Yeah, from the Office hub, yeah, the Office client.
is there some setting that you need to put?
You don't. You should. It should be similar to how you're accessing. If you're using if you're using the full name of that SharePoint server, you should be able to access and get prompted for that by that proxy for the authentication scheme there. Yeah, we should talk about that offline, right? Because that should still work, that you're able to access across UAG to that SharePoint on-prem.
Cool. Yeah.
How do you get mobile devices? How do you get to where you're at here if you're on SP2010 and not planning for a while to go to SP2013?
So the easiest way to get here would be to upgrade to SP 2013. In all seriousness, a lot of the mobile experiences we built are inherent to SharePoint 2013 because we did have a huge emphasis on mobile as part of 2013, both mobile browser, mobile apps, mobile authentication. So we are providing a really good support matrix for 2013. When we get questions around 2010, the answer is largely we haven't invested in making these backwards compatible. We really just wanted to make them forwards compatible into the future. Yep. So in terms of how you actually do taking advantage of this, it would be along the same roadmap as your organization's migration path of 2013. And I think what we're trying to show here is once you do migrate to 2013, you get a lot of this out of the box. It's just set up for you. mobile browser views, mobile apps that we've built, authentication schemes, and that sort of stuff. So
I know that a lot of our customers are looking at a hybrid environment, a limited use of 365 of online just for that reason. They have a bunch of core assets deployed on SharePoint 2010, custom applications that they've built. They might move some of the simpler capabilities into the cloud, like their My Site for social, for their access to their SharePoint documents. So,
good question. Thank you.
over on the side.
Hello. So you showed us really good stuff on the mobile with great display, especially of the Office web app as well. And I was wondering if we could get the same kind of stuff for PowerView, because that's also part of this new move, this new great stuff. Is it possible to have it on mobile?
PowerView. Oh, for PowerView. I see. Right. No, so PowerViews aren't supported. I don't believe that PowerView is supported in the Excel web app. I might need to double check on that. No, I'm getting confirmation. It is not supported. You will notice, though, that the web apps that we're shipping now are much more powerful than before. I'm not going to speak to the future of something like PowerView, but we're certainly adding in richer capability. By splitting out the web application service online and on-prem, it gives the ability to scale that service much more rapidly and add in that capability. But no future is being announced on that right now.
Yeah, please, go ahead. We'll also hang out afterwards as well, and at the mobile booth, which is, I believe, coming up in a couple of hours.
So I haven't really had much of a chance to mess around with the mobile views in 2013 yet, but I have a lot of clients who request that I disable the mobile redirect on 2010 because it's just, the smartphones are so competent now, that they can handle, they can do so little in the mobile view, they don't like it, so they have me disable it because they can do what they need to do in the smart.
Yep.
And I noticed you put up a slide there briefly that was kind of showing the different versions, like the classic,
Yep.
and then there's like an intermediate, and then the
Yep.
full browser.
And the full browser. Yep.
So I'm just wondering if 2013 handles it more elegantly, if it's giving a more intermediate version for the smartphones that's more feature-rich.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we've done is to provide that tuning through the compat.browser file, so you can actually have very specific behavior for different user agent strings, so different types of mobile devices.
Gotcha.
By default, we showed how we detected the difference between, say, the iPhone, which was served up the small the small modern view of the website, versus the iPad, which was given the full screen view of the website.
So when we looked at that, and the classic, I think, was all
Yep.
the way to the left.
Yep.
Is that
Classic
same
is
yellow
really, Classic is what's in 2010 is just Classic.
Okay.
And Classic is in 2013 really just to support your feature phones, your
Gotcha,
non-smartphone
gotcha.
devices.
So it's going to detect that
Yeah,
word.
exactly. It will detect-
Browsers
Yep.
detect. Okay.
And
Right,
serve up
so
the right file.
it already has intelligent logic built in, and you can customize it yourself afterwards. If you think it's not quite right on, you can define the devices and set it the way up you want. Plus, I mentioned around the device channels, which is like the ultimate customization feature. You have a specific type of device that's prevalent in your organization. You want it to hit a really good view, set up a device channel, and it will always hit the really good view when you come in from that device.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look into that as well. Okay. Thanks.
Great question. Cool.
Okay.
Right. I think Abed and I will hang out up